The Cape of Good Hope is a rocky headland on the Atlantic coast of South Africa. It is a common misconception that the Cape of Good Hope is the southern tip of Africa and the dividing point between the Atlantic and Indian Oceans. The true southernmost point is Cape Agulhas, about 200 kilometers 120 miles southeast. However, when following the coastline from the equator, the Cape of Good Hope marks the psychologically important point where one begins to travel more eastward than southward. Thus the rounding of the Cape in 1488 was considered a significant milestone by the Portuguese attempting to establish direct trade relations with India and the Far East. In 1488, navigator Bartholomew Dias named the peninsula Cabo Tormentoso, or the Cape of Storms. It was later renamed by King John II of Portugal Cabo da Boa Esperança, the Cape of Good Hope, because of the great optimism engendered by opening a sea route to the east. The term Cape of Good Hope was also used to indicate the early Cape Colony commissioned by the Dutch East India Company, and established in 1652 by the merchant Jan van Riebeek as a reprovisioning station in the vicinity of the Cape Peninsula. Just prior to the formation of the Union of South Africa, the term referred to the entire region that was to become the Cape Province in 1910. South Africa is located at the southernmost region of Africa, with a long coastline that stretches more than 1,550 miles 2,500 kilometers and across two oceans, the Atlantic and the Indian. The Cape Peninsula is a generally rocky peninsula that juts out for 75 kilometers 47 miles into the Atlantic at the southwestern extremity of the continent. At the southern end of the peninsula are the Cape of Good Hope, and about 2.3 kilometers, 1.4 miles, to its east is Cape Point. Geologically, the rocks found at the two capes and indeed over much of the peninsula are part of the Table Mountain group, and are formed of the same type of sandstone as those exposed in the faces of Table Mountain itself. Cape Town is about 50 kilometers to the north of the Cape, in Table Bay at the north end of the peninsula. Table Mountain overlooks Cape Town. The peninsula forms the western boundary of False Bay. The Cape of Good Hope is sometimes given as the meeting point of the Atlantic Ocean and Indian Ocean. However, Cape Agulhas, about 200 kilometers 120 miles to the southeast, is defined by the International Hydrographic Organization to be the dividing point between the two oceans. The term Cape of Good Hope has also been used in a wider sense, to indicate the area of the early European colony in the vicinity of the Cape. Both the Cape of Good Hope and Cape Point offer spectacular scenery. The whole of the southernmost portion of the Cape Peninsula is the wild, rugged, scenic, and generally unspoiled Table Mountain National Park. The park runs approximately north-south along the range of mountains that make up the mountainous spine of the Cape Peninsula, from Signal Hill in the north, through Lion's Head, Table Mountain, Constantiaberg, Silvermine Nature Reserve, the mountains of the southern peninsula, and terminates at Cape Point. The park is not a single contiguous area. The undeveloped mountainous areas which make up most of the park are separated by developed urban areas on shallower terrain. Thus the park is divided into three separate sections. The section that covers the southernmost area of the Cape Peninsula stretches from Cape Point and the Cape of Good Hope in the south, as far north as Scarborough on the Atlantic coast and Simonstown on the False Bay coast. It was formed from the Cape of Good Hope Nature Reserve. The South African Marine Living Resources Act is strictly enforced throughout the Table Mountain National Park, and especially in marine protected areas. Disturbance or removal of any marine organisms is strictly prohibited between Schuster's Bay and Hoek van Bobbejaan, but is allowed in other areas during season. The Cape of Good Hope, Afrikaans, Kaap die Goeie Hoop KPDAJ up, is a rocky headland on the Atlantic coast of the Cape Peninsula in South Africa. A common misconception is that the Cape of Good Hope is the southern tip of Africa, based on the misbelief that the Cape was the dividing point between the Atlantic and Indian Oceans. In fact, the southernmost point of Africa is Cape Agulhas, about 150 kilometers, 90 miles, to the east-southeast. The currents of the two oceans meet at the point where the warm water Agulhas current meets the cold water Bengala current and turns back on itself. That oceanic meeting point fluctuates between Cape Agulhas and Cape Point, about 1.2 kilometers, 0.75 miles, east of the Cape of Good Hope. When following the western side of the African coastline from the equator, however, the Cape of Good Hope marks the point where a ship begins to travel more eastward than southward. Thus, the first modern rounding of the Cape in 1487 by Portuguese explorer Bartolomeu Dias was a milestone in the attempts by the Portuguese to establish direct trade relations with the Far East, although Herodotus mentioned a claim that the Phoenicians had done so far earlier. Dias called the Cape Cabo das Tormentas, Cape of Storms, Dutch, Stormkop, which was the original name of the cape. As one of the great capes of the South Atlantic Ocean, it has long been of special significance to sailors, many of whom refer to it simply as the Cape. It is a waypoint on the Cape route and the Clipper route, followed by clipper ships to the Far East and Australia, and still followed by several offshore yacht races. The term Cape of Good Hope is also used in three other ways. It is a section of the Table Mountain National Park, within which the cape of the same name, as well as Cape Point, falls. Prior to its incorporation into the national park, this section constituted the Cape Point Nature Reserve. It was the name of the early Cape colony established by the Dutch East Indies Company in 1652, on the Cape Peninsula. Just before the Union of South Africa was formed, the term referred to the entire region that in 1910 was to become the Cape of Good Hope Province, usually shortened to the Cape Province. The Cape of Good Hope is at the southern tip of the Cape Peninsula, about 2.3 kilometers, 1.4 miles, west and a little south of Cape Point on the southeast corner. Cape Town is about 50 kilometers to the north of the Cape, in Table Bay at the north end of the peninsula. The peninsula forms the western boundary of False Bay. Geologically, the rocks found at the two capes, and indeed over much of the peninsula, are part of the Cape supergroup, and are formed of the same type of sandstones as Table Mountain itself. Both the Cape of Good Hope and Cape Point offer spectacular scenery. The whole of the southernmost portion of the Cape Peninsula is a wild, rugged, scenic, and generally unspoiled national park. The term the Cape has also been used in a wider sense, to indicate the area of the European colony centered on Cape Town, and the later South African province. Since 1994, it has been broken up into three smaller provinces, the Western Cape, Eastern Cape, and Northern Cape. Parts of the province were also absorbed into the northwest. With its diverse habitat, ranging from rocky mountain tops to beaches and open sea, the Cape of Good Hope is home to at least 250 species of birds. Bushbirds tend to be rather scarce because of the coarse, scrubby nature of fynbos vegetation. When flowering, however, proteas and ericas attract sunbirds, sugarbirds, and other species in search of nectar. For most of the year, there are more small birds in coastal thicket than in fynbos. Large animals are a rare sight in the Cape of Good Hope, but there are a wealth of small animals such as lizards, snakes, tortoises, and insects. There are some herds of zebra, eland, and a variety of other antelope. Small mammals include rock hyrax, dassie, striped mouse, water mongoose, Cape clawless otter, and white deer. Baboons also inhabit the area. The area offers excellent vantage points for whale watching. The southern right whale is the species most likely to be seen in False Bay between June and November. Other species are the humpback whale and bride's whale. Seals and dusky dolphins or orca, the killer whales, may also be seen. The strategic position of the Cape of Good Hope between two major ocean currents ensures a rich diversity of marine life. There is a difference between the sea life west of Cape Point and that to the east due to the markedly differing sea temperatures. The Cape of Good Hope is an integral part of the Cape Floristic Kingdom, the smallest but richest of the world's 6 floral kingdoms. This comprises a treasure trove of 1,100 species of indigenous plants, of which a number are endemic. Two types of fynbos, fine bush, coastal fynbos on alkaline sands and inland fynbos on acid soils, are found. Characteristic fynbos plants include proteas, ericas, heath, and restios, reeds. Some of the most striking and well-known members belong to the Proteaceae family, of which up to 24 species occur. These include king protea, sugar bush, tree pincushion, and golden cone bush. Many popular horticultural plants such as pelargoniums, freesias, daisies, lilies, and irises also have their origins in fynbos. The Cape Peninsula is a narrow finger of land with beautiful valleys, bays, and beaches. The Cape of Good Hope at its tip is the most southwesterly point of Africa, where the cold Agulhas current on the west and the warm Agulhas current on the east merge. This allows for a rich diversity of marine life. One of the world's highest sea cliffs at 250 meters, 820 feet, above sea level, it provides an excellent vantage point for whale and dolphin watching. As one of the Great Capes of the South Atlantic Ocean, the Cape of Good Hope has been of special significance to sailors for many years. It is a major milestone on the clipper route, followed by clipper ships to the Far East and Australia, and is still followed by several offshore yacht races. These features make the Cape one of the most popular tourist attractions in South Africa. In addition, the Cape is encompassed within the Table Mountain National Park, which is in turn part of the larger Cape Floral World Heritage Site, 2004. Both National Park and World Heritage Site status provides for conservation measures and environmental protection. Of particular scientific interest are the plant reproductive strategies, including the adaptive responses to fire of the flora and the patterns of seed dispersal by insects. The pollination biology and nutrient cycling are other distinctive ecological processes found in the site. Thank you for watching this video.